Hi, Jonathan York from Bay Financial Partners, looking at investment markets. Volatility certainly returned now to the equity markets, obviously taking their feed from the US equity market. That's seen a pretty roller coaster ride after President Trump sort of appeared to sort of do a complete U-turn in terms of the trade negotiations with China, which were supposed to be going quite well. He then imposed tariffs up to 25% on about $200 billion worth of goods. Further talk about a further possible sort of $350 billion. China's obviously retaliated, and they're looking at sort of hitting the US, really where the only sort of place they can do in terms of the agricultural products. And President Trump has now turned up the heat even further and really sort of gone after Huawei in a sort of a big way. Now that's the Chinese mobile phone company and telecommunications. And what he's done, he's sort of placed it under a case of national security levels in terms of potential sort of spying implications, etc., and really sort of trying to stop Huawei from getting into the US. What he's going to do is stop US consumers from using their goods, but also as well from US companies supplying Huawei to build their end product. The biggest implication for Huawei so far has been Google coming out and with their Android apps and software, and potentially sort of stopping them from using that from sort of August, September of this year. So now Huawei's left in a pretty sort of difficult situation, because if this sort of trade negotiations and the sort of dispute isn't resolved, then their ongoing research and development and planning for future products can't include Google software. Now obviously appreciate that's a pretty major blow. But it's still sort of quite interesting that most sort of analysts and economists still expect some sort of trade deal to be done within the next sort of 3 to 6 months. So despite both sort of sides talking tough and sort of saying they're in for the long haul, as most economists and analysts still expect some sort of deal to be done in the next sort of 3 to 6 months. What's probably even more surprising, and this is probably one of the few things that President Trump does seem to have unanimous support on. Both sides of the aisle of Congress, Democrats and Republicans, support his stance on the China trade talks. Now, President Trump did suffer a bit of a blow this week where a judge ruled against him in a case where he told his sort of staff to ignore a subpoena from the Democrats in terms of his financial information. And that's going to be very interesting to see how that sort of plays through. Because also as well, Deutsche Bank, pretty much the only sort of bank that has sort of done business with him over the last sort of few years, has also been subpoenaed to hand over evidence, and believe that they are complying with those subpoenas. Despite President Trump and his family trying to put up many legal blocks and suing Deutsche for doing it. So against this sort of backdrop, obviously you expect a little bit of volatility in the equity market. But if you look at it over a sort of weekly basis, the moves aren't really too great if you go from sort of Monday to Friday. In between, yes, there's a bit of a roller coaster, but really sort of net result at the end of the week or at the end of the few days, it's not too great. And obviously the main reason for that is you've got a pretty strong corporate earnings season just behind the US market. You've also got a pretty strong economy as well. With the Fed seeming to come to the party as well and looking to put rates on hold now for the next sort of 6 to 9 months, at present things look pretty good in the US. Obviously, the caveat on that is that it just depends how long this trade dispute drags on with China. But just in terms of trade disputes, there was a little bit of good news for the Mexicans and the Canadians on the steel and aluminum tariffs, and they were renegotiated this week. Oil hasn't really done too much. It's still sort of stuck sort of 60 to 65, currently trading around 63 and change on WTI. In terms of Brexit, Prime Minister May has sort of rehashed her deal, made a few sort of minor changes, but also as well dangled the carrot there now that if they do pass this, they will then potentially have a second referendum on Brexit. And she's also announced as well that once this is sorted, she will then leave the Conservative Party and resign as Prime Minister. The bets are now sort of raging as to who will take over. Current leader appears to be Boris Johnson, the ex-Foreign Minister. Now, interestingly, he is clearly in the Leave camp, so it'll just be very interesting to see how this does sort of play through in terms of the vote. And if it does get passed, then if there is that second referendum, and most people now believe that if there was a second referendum in the UK, the vote would be to stay. That would then be very interesting to see how that would sort of play out. Given the current odds that it looks like Boris Johnson would then be the Prime Minister in sort of September, October of this year. In the end, a major surprise in the Australian election with Scott Morrison getting back. Labor Party really polled pretty poorly in the end on actual voting day, and Scott Morrison gets back with looks like what's going to be a majority government. So hopefully that might bring a little bit of stability out there, but also as well potentially for the Australian market. Labor was pretty keen on sort of trying to do away with the franking credits. That now has been obviously sort of put to one side. And Morrison's government won't follow those policies. So that should see a little bit of stability come back, I say, into the Australian market, but also as well, probably investors coming back in as well, as most of the uncertainties now been removed. Here in New Zealand, a couple of corporate issues out there. We've got Wellington Airport looking about an 11-year bond. The first year will be 6 years until it's reset. Minimum rate 4%. Trustpower as well, launching a bond, 10 years, 5-year minimum rate 3.95, then it's reset after 5 years. Now, if you're interested in any of those two options, call us on 0800 867 323. It's worth bearing in mind with that as well, with the OCR now at 1.5, one of the major retail banks has put out a paper that they expect rates to be around this level or lower until mid sort of 2022. Also as well, we've got about 5 weeks now to the end of KiwiSaver, so it's pretty important you just check those balances to make sure that you are going to get that maximum tax credit. If you're unsure on what that is, call us on 0800 867 323 or go to the website www.bayfinancialpartners.co.nz. Obviously, most New Zealand investors are looking for income, and so with term deposit rates sort of falling off the back of that cut on the OCR, there are plenty of alternatives out there. And if you're interested in discussing what is available, so call us on 0800 867 323 or go to the website www.bayfinancialpartners.co.nz for lots of interesting articles. And we look forward to speaking to you soon.